Democrats Ed Davey and the Shadow Defence Minister Liam Fox. Bob Ainsworth, why not put Trident straight into the Strategic Defence Review? Would you support such a thing?
We took a decision on Trident in 2006. We took it in a timely fashion because that is when the decision needed to be taken in order to replace the boats before they got beyond their service life.
But the answer is no, I would not let it go into the Strategic Defence Review.
Well, we've said that in terms. Now, we're not opposed to being involved, and indeed we would encourage the kind of talks that are going on now. Multilateral nuclear disarmament is something that we ought to be aiming for. But I do agree with Ming Campbell that there is no feasible alternative that doesn't involve a lot more nuclear weapons.
Liam Fox, why not put it into the Strategic Defence Review?
We took the decision in 2006-07 because if we hadn't, we would have denied ourselves the option of being able to have a continuous at-sea deterrent based on the Trident missile system. And if there's to be any other system, we have to know what missile we would have and to develop it. We'd need to know what method we would have for launching it, and all those things would need to be laid out and costed. Now, we know from the annex and the work done for the debate in Parliament back in 2006 that if we want to have a continuously deployable deterrent, this was actually going to be the lowest cost over the long period, and no one's been able to tell us any other system that would be cheaper or any indicative costs.
So on that, I can't really put a cigarette paper between the two of you, but Ed Davey, you would.
Well, nor with some of the Liberal Democrats.
Well, but you want it put into the Strategic Defence Review or not?
We do, as does Ming Campbell. I think Bob's wrong on that. The generals in today's Times say it's a major strategic blunder not to include the renewal of Trident in the Defence Review that all parties are signed up to. And I think you're right to challenge the Labour and Conservative parties to do that. They've stitched it up before the election, and they've stitched it up before the disarmament conference in New York next month, when President Obama is trying for a nuclear-free world.
But you would have prejudged it. You will already have said there are things I want you to consider in putting it into the defence. You wouldn't have it totally reviewable in the Strategic Defence Review.
Well, the only thing we've said is that we don't believe a like-for-like replacement of Trident because it's a Cold War nuclear deterrent which at a press of a button can destroy St. Petersburg and Moscow. We don't think that's right. That's right, because the truth is the security threats that faces Britain in the 21st century, things like terrorism, things like failed states, they don't really require the sort of nuclear deterrents that we've had before. We may well need a nuclear deterrent, but not a Cold War style.
Do you argue then that Trident is going to take money away from frontline resources?
If you go for a like-for-like replacement of Trident, absolutely.
Right, let's leave it at that.
So what will the cost be then of any alternatives? This is a test for the Liberal Democrats about whether they can be trusted with the defence of the next generation, because decisions have to be taken now.
Well, Liam,
and hang on a second, and whether they can be straight about the numbers. They say they're going to save $100 billion. Well, they say that's the cost of Trident over 40 years. If they're not going to have that, what are we going to have, and how much will it cost us?
The people who are being irresponsible and reckless with our defence and our security of our nation are the Conservative Party and Labour Party. Don't take the Liberal Democrats' word for it. Take the word of the generals today. They call it a major strategic blunder that these parties will not put this into the strategic defence review.
What's the answer to the question, though? How much would an alternative cost?
We believe that you can extend the life of Trident as one example of how you could go forward, as does General Lord Guthrie, a former Chief of Defence Staff, who was responsible for our army.
Let me bring in Bob Ainsworth, because you look at the books the whole time. It's going to be a charge on frontline resources.
We have already reduced the power of the Trident system by 75%, something that I frankly don't believe, had we had a Conservative government in recent years, would have been the case. I don't think
But you haven't quite answered my question. My question is,
let me make
if you keep Trident at the level at which you want to keep it, it's going to detract from frontline forces.
But let me make this point, right? I don't believe that a Conservative government would have done that had they been in power, in recent years. And the generals who are talking today, in other circumstances, would tell us that the threat is uncertain, that it can change dramatically over time, and if we were
You've not answered my question. My question
the point I want to make,
is Trident in its present form, if you keep it as it is, taking away resources from the front line monetarily?
No, because it is separately budgeted for, and it doesn't come out of the defence budget. But the point I want to make is that if we removed it unilaterally
this is nonsense.
entirely, if we removed it unilaterally and entirely, we leave the country open to nuclear blackmail.
Our position is not unilateralist, as you know, Bob. You are taking money from the front line if you go for a like-for-like replacement. But worse, you've got people like President Obama, you've got people on the Republican right of America, people like Kissinger, people like Schultz, arguing for a nuclear-free world because they say the theory of deterrence, which applied in the Cold War years, does not apply in the 21st century. But Republicans and Democrats,
Obama is surely leaving your position
world?
somewhat anachronistic, isn't he?
And, well, there are two things. First of all, none of the generals who were involved in the letter today to the Times predicted the war in Afghanistan or 9/11 or the war in Iraq.
Well, you needn't leave it at that. You've got Richard Dannett, who's part of your staff, as it were. He thinks it should be put into the strategic
He supports our
review.
policy.
No, he doesn't support Trident in its present form.
Yes, he does support our policy in this election.
You're in real trouble on this, Liam.
There are two things. One is you cannot predict the threats of the future. And this is about giving us the option to have a continuous deployable deterrent right through to 2050 and beyond. If we deny ourselves that option, we don't properly have a place at the deterrent.
But I still don't see where Obama and Medvedev are in this. They've stripped theirs down. We're going to keep ours going.
We are totally and utterly supportive of any attempt to reduce and remove nuclear weapons on a multilateral basis. But Ming Campbell produced in March a report that said that a land-based system nor an air-based system was feasible, and that any other form of submarine-based system would require a lot more weapons.
Ming is absolutely true what we're saying. The problem that Bob and Liam have got, in New York, next month, we're trying to get rid of nuclear weapons across the world, and Britain is saying, oh no, we're not going to pay part of that, we're going to renew our Cold War deterrent.
I'm afraid
that's just untrue.
It is absolutely
basically
true.
untrue. We've already reduced our number of warheads and continue to.
I have no doubt there'll be more of this in the debate tomorrow night. Thank you all three very much for coming in. After the break, when parties come together, argue together, the politicians.
How dare you deny the people their choice?
Politicians are playing their views on coalition rule in Scotland's first televised election.